Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
A reminder that Donnie and Dolly, a presentation of our title sponsor, Able Auctions, and as always, we thank them. Training camp continues for the Canucks up in Whistler, and here to talk about it from the Athletic Sportsnet 650 Radio is Thomas Drance, as always on a Friday. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, gentlemen. Lovely to be up in Whistler, and behind me, the Canucks have already taken the ice for goaltenders ice ahead of 3 practice sessions and a scrimmage on day 2 of training camp. And one difference, gentlemen, I want to tell you about today from yesterday that I noticed already. Yesterday, they had Ian Clark warm up Thatcher Demko alongside Henrik and Daniel Sedina and Mikhail Samuelsson. And they ran sort of the equivalent of like a 2-minute drill, sort of, cross-crease passes warm up with 3 guys, who played on the line together and manufactured like 125, 130 points as a trio over multiple seasons. And it was just about the meanest thing I've ever seen a coaching staff do to a goaltender. Like, these guys aren't just like former players, right? They're all fit. Like, they all look like they could run a 2-minute mile. Mm-hmm. And their chemistry is still there, right? Like, they probably, you see these all the time, and, the goaltender gets beat here and there. They probably beat both Thatcher Demko and Ty Young on a combined like 14 of 16 sequences. It was genuinely cruel. Can't help but make the goalies better, but nonetheless, it was one of the funniest things I've seen at an NHL training camp in a long, long time. Looks like they've dialed it down. Looks like it's the AHL coaching staff warming up the goalies today.
It's good to know that Daniel and Henrik are boosting Thatcher Demko's confidence. All right, day 1. What does we go back? What stuck out for you, Thomas?
Well, a lot of work on breakouts, right? Don't think that's a surprise, right?
Yes.
All the drills look to have a forecheck and breakout. Not all the drills, but a big emphasis seemed to be on forecheck and breakout drills. Don't think that's a shock considering management's pointed commentary about the way this team played last season. Mm-hmm. Also don't think it's a shock considering the sort of essential nature of the forecheck for the way this team performed under Bruce Boudreau, right? I feel like that sort of work really encapsulates what this team needs to A, be better at, and B, continue to make their bread and butter if they're going to make the sort of noise that the organization hopes to this year. Additionally, the line combinations, Niels Höglander looks like he's going to have an uphill climb here. Mm-hmm. Kyle Burrows looks like he's going to have an uphill climb here. Danny DeKeyser gets a premium opportunity right off the bat. Danny DeKeyser getting thrown into what we'd consider to be a top 4 role on a PTO sort of tells you a lot about how to read the organization's commentary about being totally happy with what they've got on their back end, right? Doesn't it? Speaks volumes. Mm-hmm. And then Elias Pettersson with those 2, incoming Russian free agent forwards they signed, and Andrei Kuzmenko on the left, Ilya Mikheyev on the right. Pettersson was their best player in that day 1 training camp scrimmage. Let's not make a mountain out of that molehill, but liked to see him dialed in and assertive. Chemistry looks like it's going to be a work in progress there, but we'll see. I think that line's going to get a long look, and it'll be fascinating to see if they can sort of find some magic as a trio.
Don't bring up moles around me. I've got a major mole issue. But moving on here, Brock Boeser says he's capable of scoring 30 goals. We all know he's capable, but he says he's going to score 30 goals. What'd you make of that comment?
I mean, he's basically right. If you look at Brock Boeser's sort of baseline production, like, one thing about Boeser is he's a pretty reliable shot volume guy. You get a few of these in the NHL, like Thomas Tatar was one in his prime for a long time, where they shoot so often and they're such good shooters that, they don't even need a ton of bounces necessarily. You don't even need to shoot 16% to be sort of a relatively consistent 25 to 30 goal guy. Boeser profiles that way. Now, here's sort of the issue, gentlemen, because there's 3 separate seasons in which Boeser has scored at a 30-goal pace, but hasn't played 82 games, right? Now, once that or twice that was because of injury. Once that was because the season was shortened as a result of a pandemic. So, it's not all durability. But when you look at Boeser's career sort of shooting percentage and shot rate at 5-on-5, when you look at his power play sort of profile since he moved to be a net front guy, right? If he misses 11 games, his sort of baseline production is somewhere between 25 and 27 goals. Like, if you're going to get to 30, right? If you're going to collect that number of goals, the key for Boeser isn't going to be how he plays, how he shoots, how his finished game sort of holds up. It's going to be play all 82. If he plays all 82, he's going to hit 30. What's the more important milestone from my perspective when it comes to Brock Boeser? He's such a smart player who's so good on the wall now that he doesn't need to score 30 to be a big part of why this team wins games. What's the milestone that I want to see the most from Brock Boeser? Play all 82. If he plays all 82, he's getting 30 anyway, right? Play all 82. I think that would be a tremendous accomplishment for a forward who's, not done it yet to this point in his career. Although, again, he's played some full seasons. Pandemic just didn't permit them to play 82 those years.
Yeah, and his highest is 71 games, Thomas. Thomas, let's go over to Bo Horvat. I got to ask you, you and I have been talking about this for a couple of weeks, and we kind of know they're far apart. There's a lot of work to do before they get the deal done, Thomas. Where are we right now? The regular season opener is not far away, Thomas. I don't know if they're going to talk once the regular season starts. What are you hearing the latest on Bo?
Well, look, players of Horvat's caliber often don't want to be bogged down in contract talks in season, right? That's just a standard sort of operating procedure.
Thomas, especially in the Canadian market, Now
that said, Rick, same agent, Pat Morris, had Jacob Markstrom at the time, right?
Yeah.
They weren't going to talk in season, and yet they sort of did, right? I mean, Markstrom didn't get heavily involved. They didn't get close enough that he had to. Yeah. But it's not like they cut off all conversations entirely. And then we know, because we went through the Jacob Markstrom sort of extension, will they or won't they, just 2 years ago, right? We've tracked this before. I would be surprised if Horvat has any interest in talking in season, but I'd also be surprised if there was any sort of declaration from Morris, right? They didn't really do it with Markstrom. Markstrom himself said, I'm just going to focus on the season. But, I would be Morris tends to operate in, a relatively classy, sort of under the radar way, right? That's his preference. We saw that as things played out with Markstrom. I suspect we'll see something similar as contract talks with Horvat sort of shape up. Yeah, sides appear to be, looking at a gap here. They were looking at a gap with Brock Boeser, and then that got done. They were looking at a gap with JT Miller, then that got into a realm that they were comfortable doing the deal. Yeah. Will that happen with Bo Horvat, or has the dynamic changed now that they've locked up JT Miller? That's the big question for me, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
I've been saying this for a couple of weeks, but what I'm hearing is that once the Canucks got Miller done, right? I think their urgency to move closely to close on this particular deal diminished. I just think it diminished. And so we'll see where this goes. But I do think it's got, certainly the possibility of dragging out written all over it.
Yeah. Thomas, you and I have talked about waiver wire coming up. The Canucks have been in on some players. We knew Kelvin DeHaan. They were poking around Sonny Milano. What do you see happening with that $1.3 million they have left? Are they going to scour that waiver wire coming up here in the next week or two pretty good?
Well, it feels like it, although clearly, Rick, they're giving Danny DeKeyser every opportunity to make a big impression, right? You don't put him with Tyler Myers. You don't put him in the top four if you're not interested in gathering information there and continuing to evaluate your options.
Right.
And consistent with that, I think the waiver wire looms large. We know that Canucks pro scouts were sent out to scour rookie tournaments. We know that they're going to be doing the same in the preseason. And we know that a lot of teams are positioned these days where you face some really tough decisions in getting to your numbers in terms of the 23-man roster. I mean, look at the way this team's positioned, Rick. And one thing we're arguing about a lot, right, as I keep saying, in order to maximize their Ferland capture, I suspect one of Joshua or Burrows ends up on waivers, right? This team likes both players, right? Really likes both players. But those are the types of decisions that every team faces, particularly in the flat cap era, particularly in a world where LTI impacts so many different teams around the NHL. So, the waiver wire is a hardier source of talent these days than it used to be. I suspect that'll be a major option for the Canucks. And look, no question about it. I mean, despite the conservative approach that we've seen since Rutherford and Alvin got into town, Rutherford is still a bit of a gunslinger, right? You can never count out that trade before the start of the season. And often those trades come together right before the final waiver day, ahead of the opening night roster deadline, which we saw last year when the Canucks sent Olio Levy to Florida for Juho Lammikko and Noah Juulsen. That's another route that I'm sort of eyeing here. And look, make no mistake, just like the Canucks still are looking for upgrades on their blue line and have Danny DeKeyser playing in the top four no matter what they say in public, they'd still love to clear cap space. If they can find a way to clear some money here, they'll do it.
Yeah, for sure.
We're talking to the president of the Danny DeKeyser fan club, Thomas Drance. Hey, Thomas, when you look at on social media going into camp, and fans would go through their line combinations, so many people had, and we're talking about fans here, Tanner Pearson on the fourth line. Lo and behold, camp starts, and he's with Miller and Boeser. What do the Canucks? And this is for the people who are down on Tanner Pearson. What do the Canucks see in Tanner Pearson? What do they like, maybe even love about Tanner Pearson?
Well, I'll tell you what. Tanner Pearson is one of those players who his teammates love playing with, right? Mm-hmm. But all of that said, what do the Canucks see in Jason Dickinson playing fourth-line center when they just went out and got Curtis Lazar, who's best as a center and also is right-handed, playing on the wing to accommodate Jason Dickinson? Well, partly – that's about the bigger picture. That's not just about what makes our fourth line best, right? It's also about, can we rebuild the value of this player so that we can maybe clear cap space going forward? Tanner Pearson with JT Miller, I think there's a significant tell that the coaching staff wants a really defensively reliable top line. They put two of their best two-way wingers, Ilya Mikheyev would be the third, but two of their best three two-way wingers with JT Miller. That suggests to me that that's like a clear-cut top line, likely to get some tough matchups, right? So there's hockey reasons for it, for sure. But also, one thing this organization is looking at really closely is how much money they're spending in terms of sort of those middle-class contributors. Not top of the lineup guys, but guys who are, sort of good supporting cast guys who maybe make a little bit too much. And, I don't think it should be any surprise to see those types of players put in premium opportunities as this club evaluates their options and remains focused on the big picture, clearing cap space for the future and gaining some flexibility. So that could be a factor here too. Last thing here is that, my friend Tony Gallagher used to say, training camp is the most optimistic time of year. I hate it. and
it is true.
And Tanner Pearson on the top line also, to me, just illustrates, one area of concern that I continue to sort of harbor as I watch this team play. And that's this, we're so used to saying, well, the defense is responsible for playing defense, right? And the forwards are responsible for scoring. But obviously the game's more interconnected than that, right? Mm-hmm. Tanner Pearson playing in a matchup role is kind of necessary because you look up and down the Canucks lineup, they just don't have a lot of really sturdy, really reliable two-way defensive forwards up
That's
front.
Right.
You look at Horvat and Mikheyev playing on different lines, for example, sort of a clear indication that the organization kind of wants like a defensive driver on each line. Like there are sort of limitations despite all the on-paper talent that this team has in terms of the defensive conscientiousness of some of this forward group. Likewise on defense, right? It's not that Luke Shen and Tucker Poolman and company aren't really good in zone defensive players. They are. It's that, can this team, when Quinn Hughes isn't on the ice, transition the puck cleanly enough and consistently enough, right? To have their best offensive players getting the puck in stride and not be so reliant on the forecheck that it's really their only answer for manufacturing offense, particularly against those teams that move the puck an awful lot better than them. So, the Tanner Pearson thing also speaks to, I think, sort of a lingering construction issue that I see sort of holding over on this roster from last season. I think it's not quite as likely to be fatal next year as it was this year, or this year as it was last year, but I still see it. It's still something that I'm concerned about as the Canucks get set for day 2 of training camp.
You okay there, Thomas? There are some foreign sounds there. It seemed like you got startled.
Maybe it's one of your fans. Maybe it's one of your fans. You have
Somebody's
numerous,
screaming.
millions of fans.
Guys, it's the stick saw. They're cutting stick.
Oh,
lengths,
okay.
and I just
Oh,
wasn't
okay.
surprised. I was just surprised by it momentarily. Excuse me.
All right.
Okay, and a happy belated birthday, by the way, to Tony Gallagher. Just so you
Absolutely.
know.
The best. The legend.
Thank you, Thomas. Appreciate it. Up in Whistler, Thomas Drance from the Athletic and Sportsnet 650 Radio. That was surprising yesterday. Danny DeKeyser, they gave him, you're a defenseman. What number do you want? He gave him number 4. That's a sign that maybe they're really serious about this guy, even though he's on a PTO, paired with Tyler Myers. Like Thomas said, that smells of top 4.
Victor Rask, a PTO in Columbus on a line with Johnny Gaudreau. Sonny Milano, second line. You got to give these guys an opportunity, the PTOs, to play with good players, to see if they can play with good players.
I realize it's very early, but that was one interesting takeaway from day one
Yep.
Up at Whistler.